Pull this back. Yeah. What I should have exposed to me is a surface with no laps, if it's correct. And if you notice, there's not a single lap on this side. It's all continuously one layer of uni. I may end up with some butts, but no laps. And the surface that goes down against that shear web should have no external laps on it. That should all have been done on the other surface. There it is. Okay. You notice that, Misha? Done. Okay, now then, when we walk over to the Canard, we will have pre-wetted the interior surfaces and applied a small bead of flux in the two transition corners. And we'll be back to you at that stage as we do that. Here I've got transparency, almost transparency, and here I've got a translucent condition. The resin, you can tell that is how you can tell that it's wetting. Now as I brushed resin in here, I made certain that the holes that I had drilled in the phenolic, I didn't get any resin in. Now I can rub this and I can tell that when I hit something sticky, that's a dry spot. Clean gloves, no sticky this far, nice and wet. Now I've got a tapered condition wet, wider, 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 narrow it all the way down. I'll get a little too much here, but no big deal. Now I'm going to put a bead of flux in these corners. The finger works great for making that radius. Just zip, zip. And we'll be back with you with a mixture of flux. Okay. And notice how much extra material I end up on here. The radius is just about right, but I end up with a lot of stuff on there I don't want. Misha, would you make me up a small, cut the squeegee in half for me, please?
Yes, sir.
Or 1/3 of it. Just give me a third of it. Pair of scissors. I'm having Misha cut me an automotive squeegee. It's got the right radius on it. And I'm going to use for doing the cleanup work. Do this on all of the intersections. And we'll be back to you when we have it all applied and cleaned up. Here's the squeegee we were referring to before. I can go into the corner and take all that extra material off. And that's what it should end up looking like. Little bits of flux like this here don't hurt us any. And you can do a final rub down with your finger. I already have the radius, so I'm not going to rub the corner with it. So do this everywhere applicable, and then proceed. I'll be back with you in a minute. See clearly from the end. I'm going to shade it straight from the end here. Okay, you can see that radius. Smooth it with your finger if you want to make it consistent. But it's already pretty well cleaned up. And light improves. Okay. And now we're going to grab the aluminum and lower it in here. It's ready to go. We're back with you in a moment. Now we wanted to make certain that we had this correct. And as it gets flipped over, that means this edge, the straight edge, is, have that right?
Yes.
Huh? Yeah, I think it's reversed. Okay, a little thought doesn't hurt. It's going to get flipped over. And, oh, how fun. Flip it over. Flip it over. No. Stay there. Flip it over. Bingo. Okay. No, it's not, Misha. It's right. This edge is straight. This is the curve.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Stop. Wouldn't hurt if you're watching to have an extra individual to control certain things, is I need to go to the middle of the tape. And I'm going to take this and fold it down the center. Now the basis of what I said about it being straight, really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Okay, let's fudge it down this direction. Okay, we're on the money. Now I'm going to make sure that this edge here doesn't matter. Okay, this is my center line. Just pull down that direction just a little bit. Okay, good. Now I've got the tape up at the center. Now I'm going to pull this forward here until this portion of the tape matches where you want it. You get this first. Get the height just where you like it. Here, then we suck it down into that corner. Back to the middle. Tuck this down here. First into the corner in the front. As you can see, we have the same amount of glass here as we do here on this side. And it tapers fuller and fuller as we go. Okay. Corner all the way down. Now I have some extra resin left that I'm going to commit to lubricant using resin, aluminum foil. Well, you don't want anything else there, I can guarantee you that. No other form of lubricant will do. With that in the corner, you can really work it well. It appears that the only error made with this was the perception of straight on one edge and taper on the other, when in fact both edges are tapered. So you draw a center line down your pieces and taper equally on both sides. But as you can see, it really doesn't make any difference. It all comes out in the wash because the aluminum foil in the whole process is relatively flexible. Back with you in a minute after we've lubed this thing up and we start dragging fingers and squeegees and other items to push out the air. You'll hear bubbles. There'll be times you'll do this. You will swear there was a bubble and suddenly the bubble will disappear. Part of that is that if your squeegee has little rough spots on it, it'll poke a hole in the aluminum foil and the bubble will escape through the hole in the foil. See, I'm tearing it right there, and the bubble will come right up through. Can you hear that? Yeah. Can you hear that on tape? Yeah, it's the bubbles being moved around. You can see that one right there. And along here. Snap, crackle, pop. And you are more than reasonably sure that you have the bubbles out. Go and pull the foil and look for what's left, because there will be more bubbles left in there. Come on, come on, come on. You can really hear the bubbles popping there. A few times in my life I've done this and had pulled the foil and found no bubbles left. But just a few times, because I'm not patient enough. Okay. Work it a little bit more, and I'm going to pull foil. Can you come on around here? You can see the bubbles. Those marks there. You can see the bubbles. You got just the edge. Get rid of the foam. More or less difficult to remove the bubbles. More difficult if you let this layup sit around a long time and letting the resin begin to tack up before you put it on. Don't do that. You want to make certain that you've... Get in here, Richard. I want that light in here. I want them to see the area as it gets exposed. Back up some. It's really important, because that's where your load transition occurs. Okay, now let's pull this piece of foil. We'll come across. Looks as though the bottom's quite good. Because this surface is still translucent, I can see through and I can see bubbles inside. You can't really see them in the video, but you'll be able to clearly see them when you do your layup, if they're there. Right down there at the bottom in the flocks. More of the same. It's going to be just that all the way down. We'll be back to you in a few minutes after I've gotten most of the bubbles out, and you can take a look at it from a bird. Okay. We're going to put 5 plies of cloth, 6 by 6 across here.
Just phenolic.
Right over, centered over the phenolic. Make sure we have no air along the bottom, no air along the top. rub, rub, rub. Make sure that you have no air in it. This is going to help distribute the load from the bolts to the phenolic into the rest of the structure. You notice we've gone with 2 plies of uni overall, then stepped into 2 more plies of uni, then bid, then another layer of bid, then we're going to focus some more bid right over our phenolics. It's just a process of distributing load in a smaller area until eventually we come right up to where our concentration of load is, right at our lift tab. Get all the way out. And then next, these are a little bit big, so I'm going to cut some material off of them. I'm going to do this 5 times here, 5 times here, and I'm done with this layup. I'll let it cure for just a little while until it gets semi-tacky. Then I'll put the canard back in its form and I'll put the lid on so that as the shear web cures, if there's any changes in the shear web, since it's only 1 day old, it was CPD, it's a relatively long cure resin, I make sure that any changes will get pushed back into shape by the upper skin and we'll cure it in situation. We'll be back with you in a little bit when we have all these plies in place. All right, we're back. We've mixed up a shot of flocks. It's a little premature though. Whereas we took our 90-degree drill drive and you have to find something that's appropriate to drill from this side through the shear web, this side through the shear web layup that we did earlier, which we did on our last video piece. Then I came in here and I did the chisel work that I did on the other side, removing all the micro and the flocks, sanding some last 105, 205. You can use your slower resin if you wish. I'm just in a little bit of a hurry today. All sanding this surface, this surface. This has been drilled. Now I've got my flocks. I've applied resin already. I've cut a stick on the short side to apply my material. And you've seen me do this before, so we're not going to waste your time by showing you every moment of this entire application. But I'll apply the material neatly on both surfaces, and I'm going to run 1 ply of bid, plus or minus 45. It's already cut here. 3/4 of an inch onto the shear web, 3/4 of an inch up into here, leaving it hang off, and then we'll cut off the excess. We'll be back with you as we get ready to put that ply down. Taking a look at this tape, I cut it probably 2.5 inches wide, 3 inches wide. And I've got less than 1 inch of lap here. And I think you can see why at one time we ran a single piece of glass from here to here to here. The reason being, as you can see, we've only got about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch in places that doesn't have a full lap on it. I guess that if you figured you were going to end up with an airplane with an AFCG and you didn't mind putting a little weight in there, it would be okay to run 1 ply glass from here down to here and all the way up. 1 shot. You could probably go less than I've got on here right now. This is extremely redundant. And the extra material made it easy for me to handle the cloth before I put it in. Now there's a layer of flocks in there. You can see it through there on the corner. And just like the last time we did this in this corner, wet it out, get rid of the bubbles, trim, and of course we're also going to, in this area, like the opposing side, we're going to put in 5 plies of bid, plus or minus 45, 6 inches by, this is about 5 inches across here, lapping fully on this surface, and then your back drill from the opposing side once it's cured. Back with you then. Since last, moments ago for you, it's been a day for us. We trimmed the glass here, and we laid this up 1 ply with the flocks in the corner. We applied the 5 plies of glass here, going underneath this lip, down the face and here, both surfaces. It cured. I sanded off the cut U's, and I also sanded the back side of the 5 ply laminate on the opposite surface of this for the application of the CLI, Canard Lift Tab Insert. Now, we used floaters here, not that that matters, it's not really important, the floaters, but they're centered, they're drilled, number 40, they're countersunk. I sanded them so that they're flush. I will grit blast these next, without grit blasting the nut portion. I'll stuff them with paper before I grit blast. I'll brush on West resin. I'll brush West resin on the back sides of these tab surfaces. The bolts that you're going to use are AN4-12As. There are 3 of them. These are 13s requiring a washer and a half. A single washer will be sufficient. You'll have enough threads through to ensure the appropriate attachment, and you'll also be avoiding a thread-bound condition by using the washer. I've pre-drilled this one. I want you to notice that this drill hole here is slightly off-center. I have much more meat here than I need to ensure full strength on this tab. And when Steve Drybread acquires this unit, I'm going to have him fudge this hole over so that when he brings it out to final diameter, he ends up in the center of the tab. If he didn't do anything here, it would be of no concern whatsoever. This is way, way, way overbuilt. This was designed so that when a builder was surfacing the old foam core version and they were sanding, that if they slid across here with 36 or 80 grit and they scratched it, it wasn't going to fail on them in flight. So it makes it structurally way overbuilt. Let me see if I've covered everything. Now we've also opened a slot up here that you previously had through the 5 plies. And, yep, covered everything. I've also back drilled these, of course, right after the layup had cured. And next, as I said, I'm going to grit blast, paint, apply with flocks, run the bolts through, and tighten them up with the appropriate torque. And I'll have to remember what that is for a 1/4 inch bolt. I generally don't use a torque wrench. Unless you have a very good feel for using aviation hardware, I would use a torque wrench. I'll see if I can dig up that torque spec before we get to the next spot. Thank you. Okay, we grit blasted these. We had them stuffed with paper so that you couldn't damage the threads. Immediately covered with West. Now I've got that same shot of resin, which is getting warm, and I'm going to cover the front face of these bolt holes without attempting to push resin inside. And I'm going to put resin right down onto the front face of the spar cap, which is visible on one of these and not on the other. I'm going to cover that edge of that spar cap either with a piece of regular paper down at the bottom so that the aluminum cannot contact the spar cap. I don't want it touching carbon fiber anywhere. And now I'm going to cover the back side of this, same area, bond the CLIs. Make sure it's been sanded to make sure you get a good bond. Now I'm going to pour out most of this, because it's exotherming on me. I'm going to turn it into a little bit of flux micro. Oh, it's getting hot. It's getting hot. It's getting warm, I should say. It's not getting hot. Now, it's impossible to keep epoxy from getting on the threads. I have done this in the past, and I've had things occur that required to remove lift tabs and replace them. And on a few of these occasions, the lift tabs and the bolts and the CLIs had been just slopped with epoxy. In spite of that, the lift tabs were removable, the bolts were removable, the CLIs, of course, weren't. They were underneath the shear web, but they were not. There was never any need to remove them. So, in spite of the fact we know that through the squeezing out of resin that we're going to get these devices covered, you still, if you ever have to remove them, will be able to do so. Not concerned about these. These are going to be in here forever. We know that. The back sides of these, I'm going to brush with just a little bit of resin. They're covered with the standard oxides that aluminum gets covered with. So I'm not really concerned about them sticking improperly. I've also grit blasted the back of these lift tabs and had them pop off clean when I wanted to. They're great in shear, terrible in peel. They'll pop off and they've never even removed glass when doing so. All right, now my next step is to run put the lift tab, next step is to put a piece of paper between the two surfaces. And almost any paper will do. Now that the resin is spread out, it's not really a concern that it's going to cure on me. I'm going to get a sheet of paper. I'll be back in just a moment. This is the paper I'm using. Nothing special. I still have a little bit of resin left in here. Oops, I must have poured it in place. I can't get to it, but I'm just going to cover this with just a little bit. It'll soak into the paper. And I want the paper sticking down just far enough that it's sticking out the bottom. Add some resin there. Okay, it's just barely sticking out the bottom, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Now I take this and I run, washers through. Repeat on the opposite side. Take your CLI plate, line it up on the back side with a socket, tighten it in place. Back with you in a moment. I've got it in place and I'm starting on the back one. But don't go tightening them all the way up. Get one started and then the others until they start to bite. And once they start to bite, then go for the next one. Three fairly close tolerance holes. Make sure you have a relatively parallel condition. Get them all started before you decide you're going to sink one all the way up to its the point where it's really starting to tighten. That is a disaster, I can guarantee you. Now I'm starting to get the nut plate portion there. Okay, I got threads coming to the back side. I can put my finger right on the nut plate and tell that is the case. Same thing there. Can you see the back side, Richard?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to go for the middle one first. Go to the point where it's starting to see. Tell me when you see that.
That's why lots of squeezing.
Okay, now I'll get the others to start coming up.
Squeezing nicely.
Okay, a short wrench on a quarter drive is there by design to prevent you from applying too much torque to small attachment devices. I'm going to, at some point in this tape, tell you what this torque spec is before you reach the point where you can't torque it. For me, it's measured in pain. For those of you who don't wish to carry around the extra weight, get rid of the stuff that squeezes out. It's not doing anything for you. If you think the flocks around the perimeter is helping retain the CLI, forget it. Doesn't work that way. Paper's in place. We're going to go to the other side. Thank you very much. We'll go back to the next section. Okay, and you've got microphone. Okay, we're back. Take your measuring tape. I like the decimal inch version. From center line, 11.5, give me a mark. And then 34.5, give me a mark. 59.3, give me a mark. Boom. Again, 11.5, 34.5, and 59.3. And that's referenced on the inboard edges of these pieces. You notice I've got 2 marks here. And you can also see I'm going to use this particular one here. It's a little closer to the video. You can see that I've got black marks on both sides of it. This represents this edge here. There's a hole drilled back here that represents the center of my hard point. Hard point's approximately 1 inch thick. And it will butt up against the inboard surface of each rib. And these pieces are all going to be essentially the same. There'll be a double here, a single here, a single in the other positions against the inboard surface of each rib. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pencil here. Notice the way it fits. We provide you with a 1-ply per side stock to do this, as we did with your rib. And I'll take this opportunity, guys, to tell you that your shear web will be supplied to you with the phenolics buried in and the 3 holes drilled in your piece. All you have to do is taper it to fit and bond it and place it at the correct angle. And your ribs will also help set up that relationship, the bottom inside skin and the back side. Now, to put this one in, I'm going to take and give myself about 1/8 of an inch mark all the way around. And then I'm going to bevel this rib, taking nothing off of the outboard skin and removing everything up to the line on the inboard skin, right up to the outboard edge. Do that all the way around. It's important that you make this rib fit pretty well so that it pretty much is freestanding while you're putting it together. And so, give me one more moment. We have a pedestrian that wants to walk by. And I'll show you what this looks like. Again, do not damage the outboard skin. You want the bevel large enough that once this is in place, it's still holding its position, you can brush resin in underneath the bevel, the back. At some point here in the next few minutes, we will reverse the camera angle so you can see what it looks like from here. But the way it's sitting, and I can see this. I have this upper edge here. I'm going to remove some material from the inside corner. So I can get an attachment there too. Now I've got a bevel under here too. It fits well enough that I can take a droplet of super glue and put a drop here, a drop in the corner, and a drop up at the top by wicking in here at the edge so that it holds its position. Then I'll brush in resin underneath and I'll fill the gap with micro, ensuring you get a complete bond around the entire perimeter. Then I'm going to have pre-sanded this surface, this surface, this surface, that surface, that surface, so that I can put a 1-ply, a very small 1-ply bid tape on all of the edges of the ribs interface to these surfaces, and then I'll cover the micro on this side as well, lap up onto the rib and lap onto the bottom skin where the rib touches. This is SOP for all of these ribs, one ply attachment. These in their position are captured, and they essentially only act as compression members. And we'll be back to you as we do the next step in this application. This is very brief. The ribs aft of this position are in the same place, except where the hard points are. We won't have ribs adjoining their positions. But here the ribs behind are in exactly the same position as the ribs forward, and you'll cut and trim and match them to fit and install them in much the same manner as you have this one. Run. Okay, we're at left hand BL 34.5, and I've got an 1/8" drill bit, or in my case here, number 40 drill bit, and I need to drill a hole through the skin. And this is just a temporary fixment to hold it in place while I put on super glue. Get the ribs centered, and in we go. Now that's probably going to hold it enough, but I'm going to drill another hole up here in the front. Hold it straight, and I'm going to put a rib, I'll put a screw right here. These are temporary fixments, and pardon me for getting my arm in the way. Now the rib is both perpendicular this direction and perpendicular to the center line to the leading edge of the structure. Now I can take a small amount of super glue. Is that well lit, Misha? Get in there. Okay, no, don't move in. Just move into here. I want the corner to be visible, right down there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Just a teeny droplet at the bottom corner. One a little higher, right there. One up in the front, which you cannot see. And I can't do the other side because the other side's beveled. And I can wick in just a small amount right at that corner, which will run underneath and go around the corner. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 points. That means it can't move. Now we hit it with the old kicker, which will cause it to go off immediately. This stuff will all evaporate. And you can see it going away now. I don't have to remove these screws at this stage, but they don't need to be there either because the super glue has already gone off. Whenever possible, cheat. This is held in place firmly. I'm going to run just the teeniest of radiuses of flux here along this corner and up, and then on this side, because I've got a void, that beveled void that I talked about, is I'm going to fill this side here, look through here, this area here, I'm going to brush in resin, fill with micro, a nice radius over my fingertip, and then I'm going to put 1 ply glass lapping up here, well maybe 3/8 of an inch, a ½ inch from here to here, and then a ½ inch out here. All as minimalistic as I can. Glass is going to come out ½ inch from here to here, ½ inch from this corner to here, and very carefully apply, keeping this light. These ribs, no matter what we do, even 1 ply per side, are going to be way overbuilt. We can't go less than 1 ply. Back to you on the next stage. We're on, we're back. Okay, we don't need much. I'm going to give you a line so you can see. This is ½ inch right here. And this is approximately ½ inch right there. I've mixed up 105, 205, only one shot at a time. Going up underneath, well into the foam underneath. You might want to move out here, Misha. Okay, now I know I've well soaked the foam underneath. I've gone right up to my lines. I'm going to cover this. And I got this back corner to do underneath there because I'm going to make sure I get I'm using a relatively fast resin, but I don't have to do a lot of ribs at a time. I can just take my time. Wet this underside right there. As I mentioned before, no matter what we do, no matter how few plies we run, it still ends up overbuilt. Okay, so I've got that. Now I'm going to do this on the opposite side. I've pre-sanded all this stuff. And about the width of the brush when you're doing this is probably sufficient to cover all the areas that you want. If you get a little extra resin on the surfaces, do spread it. Your finger works great for spreading around resin. Okay. I'm going to brush several of these ribs with this, and based on my previous experience, I know that I can get away with probably 3 ribs worth of application before this starts going off enough where I have to go to micro. And then I'm going to do mix it up to micro and push micro into these corners before it goes off too far. And around the leading edge, underneath first, onto the wing skin, onto the rib, back in the corner, up underneath. Really get that rib wet up in there on the foam. And then this is really quick and easy in here. I'm not going to bore you with the third rib. We'll go back when I'm packing micro. Okay. You're going to notice some things here, folks, that I may have forgotten to mention. That when you first put this stuff in here, you're going to end up with micro all over everything. And really you should endeavor to not apply resin onto the surfaces of the rib until after your micro's in place. Because then you got this mix of micro, and I have to clean all this stuff off. So I don't want a mix of micro and resin on those surfaces. I've got a nice radius going there. I'm going to get all the surfaces backfilled.
Show you a stick.
I had a little, this is round, it's about the size of a regular popsicle stick. Get all the micro off there. And you got the same radius underneath here. Because this is overbuilt, if you end up with a little micro under the surface, it's no big deal. But it doesn't take much to remove it. There's the radius I was referring to before. That's what I want you to have on there. Carry that radius into the corner. And remove your excess. Have a squeegee standing by to scrape off the micro from the rest of the surfaces. One of the pluses about this process is that you can let the micro semi-cure for a half an hour, so it starts to take on a little more stiffness. You can see I'm moving the micro. Oops, that one's a little too big. John? I'm going to remove this. Can you get close up on that, Misha?
It's very, 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 very close.
Okay, so as you can see, the micro on these surfaces here.
Yes.
Scrape that off.
You can see it.
I got micro here. I don't need on there. And micro in there. Micro down below. Okay, that's how they're all going to look before I go too far. Now I can, after I do the flocks, the micro on this side, I'm going to put a small bead of flocks on the opposing surface, and then I'll probably do 3, and then I'll start the taping. I'll be back with you in a minute.
Sure.
Okay, I've cut some tapes, 1 inch, and I'm using 206. It's slower. None of this was required to be fast, but it's nice that the micro has, to some degree, stiffened and partially cured. which stabilizes the filler that I'm going to be putting glass on top of rather than diluting it and moving it about. I have to, now that I've cleaned my surfaces, I'm going to re-wet with 105-206 up to here. Wet. You can see the brush make contact with the surface right through the shear web. Okay. The further and further forward you get on this layup, folks, the less and less critical it becomes because the loads up in here amount to nothing.
Do another step.
So you guys, volume please. It's all right. Okay, now we're going to wet this out. So make sure that your surfaces are wet enough that when you put your glass tapes into them, that they do not fall down. Hang in there, Misha. Don't turn off yet. Glass tapes. These are 1 inch wide. And my scissors are right under here. I'm so organized. Okay, I'm square. I cut off enough to handle from there to there. We're videoing. Just 1 second. Okay, so now I'm going to wet it out. If your tape doesn't come around the corner and lap onto the side of the rib up at the top, don't worry about it. Come up to right here and fine. As long as you got microfill up in the front, it's cool. My glass tape is a little long up here on the sides. No big deal. I'm only going to use 1 piece of tape running in the vertical, about the height of this rib, and lapping partially. So I'm going to come around this corner up here underneath. I'm too wide. If my eyes were better, I would be laying up smaller ribs. You can see I'm going right up to the line. Treat it like any other layup, no bubbles. Okay, take the brush up underneath the bottom, wet out, use your finger. You can feel the flux underneath, and you can tell if the glass is wet. Okay, it's completely wetted, there's no air underneath. And I'm going to go on to the rib on the opposing side. It's no different than this, except I'm laying up into flocks. We'll show you a completed one when we're done, both sides. Thank you so much. No, not on my face, down here. This is not me at all. When last we met, we were talking about all these ribs. And we microed them all in, and then I just glassed them all at the same time. By the time I got to them, all the West micro was semi-hard, and brushing 206 micro, or resin, on top of the micro allowed me to smear it out and smooth it, and apply the resin and the glass strips to each piece. Just with 1 shot of resin did the whole job. And the glass only goes up a ½ inch on each piece. It could have been less than that. 3/8 would have been plenty. Now, this form. And I'm not certain, since we are pre-production development, whether or not we're going to supply you with templates of these ribs. The final position of each of these foam cores varies fore and aft a little bit, and probably there are going to be some suggestions, but what I would absolutely suggest is placing sandpaper here and here and here, and then taking, you notice this green line, I took a piece of foam in the front and about that long and rubbed it in there until it fit perfectly. Then I took a piece that was about this long and rubbed the back side until it fit perfectly. Then I put the two together and drew a line, and then cut it, sanded it, and then matched it together and superglued it here until it fit. Now you notice it's much smaller. It's because what I started with was the biggest rib, which is, since the spark caps here are the thinnest, it makes this opening the largest. So I started with the tips. And I made two of these. And this is the one-ply stock that you have. And they go right here. Now, remember what we did here was bevel one side and superglue it in place. Push in micro on one side, a little bit of flux on the other, and then the one-ply rib. We're going to do that, but we're not going to do it on both sides. We're going to do that only on one side, because on the opposing side is going to be the 1-inch thick, 6-pound density hard block foam that your inserts go into. So we'll start by bonding them in place, glassing one side. Then we'll fit the foam on the opposing surface. Now this shape right here is the shape that you'll transfer to the hard block that will micro in place against the inside of this rib. After we do that bond, we'll round the edges of the block and put we'll glass over top of them. We'll cover that though when we get to it. Now each one of these ribs, I did a pair of these, then I fitted the next set down here, which made this block smaller. And I left the foam high on the top side so I could trim it down to match the underside of the skin. After you do those two, then you slide this in further. Richard can see, I think, from down here. This was the last set here. Just fits on the interior. And I added that extra foam on the top side. And so you'll have 3 separate iterations. What I didn't do on the leading edge ribs, which I am probably going to do on these ribs, and what you will definitely do on your main wing, is that we will bond these in first, and I may use 5-minute epoxy to bond them in place. And then look down through the wing and set the wing in place and trim these until they clearly miss the underside of the foam with about a 1/16 of an inch gap. Then we do these ribs on the outside, bond them in place, and then trim them down because they're still visible from the end. And then we'll do the last ones on the upper end. Obviously, you'll clearly be able to see those. We'll get back to you in a minute after we've done the bevel prep and the sanding for bonding our first pair. As you have probably gathered by now, an awful lot of what I'm doing on this particular Canard is that I'm making it up as I go. I've seen 2 or 3 of these others of these built, and each one of them I've improved the processes to this stage. What you're looking at this point is a block of high-density foam, 6 to 9 pounds. It's either PVC or, oh God, what is it called? It is a special type of polyurethane. It's not like any polyurethane you've ever seen. It doesn't come apart. Oops, too much wide angle. There you go. Any other block of urethane you've ever seen, you rub, and it kicks off lots and lots and lots of dust. This doesn't. This stuff is as tough as wood. We're going to be installing these in these corners. See how my field of view is? Still pretty good. Now, also the last piece of film was none of these hard points were in yet, none of the ribs. And as you can see, all of the ribs are in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. All of them are in. All the way down. And they're so small that I think by feel you can easily trim them down. And if they're over-trimmed, no big deal. These particular ribs aft of the spar distribute a tremendous amount of the load that is distributed into this hard block by the NC2s and 3s, which are connected to the elevators. So if you happen to over-trim them, the fill between the top of the block and the underside in dry micro will be stronger than the foam itself and give tremendous load distribution, so no sweat. These blocks are trimmed out. You'll have a template for them, and they've been radiused here for this corner. This glass is still semi-cured, which means I don't want to have to sand this tomorrow. I'm also going to radius this vertical edge, and before I lay these ribs up in place, I'm going to completely sand the surface against which this is going to go, so that when I'm done drywall screwing this to the rib here, I can put one ply of glass from this surface around the radius and onto the inside surface, lapping onto the bottom skin here. I'll point that out again. I'll see if I can change my POV so you can see it more clearly. Back it up just a touch. Okay, this corner right here, in this case the forward inboard corner, is what I'm going to radius. I'll even show you that. For a nice full radius on there that the glass will transition around very easily. So now it's radiused on this corner here, and it's radiused on the forward corner, in this case inboard. And my glass will go from this surface here up onto the block, around the corner and onto the rib, and onto the bottom skin, distributing as much load as I can onto three surfaces. And then the top skin, of course, the top surface will bond right to the underside of the upper skin, distributing all the load possible. We'll do a little something different between the two middle ribs, where the loads are distributed into the NC2s, 2As, that the control horn of the elevators are pivoting on. They see a little more load. We'll get back to you on those parts. So we'll show you how these are installed, and we'll get back to you in a moment with our next process. Okay, back with you again. You notice the drywall screws in the box sitting there. It says grabber 1.25 inches. Since these ribs are only one ply, you can stick the tip of the screw right through the skin and thread it right into the edge of the block. Like I said before, this foam is like wood. It's so hard. You can tighten this up until the screw is almost flush on this inside. This allows you to put the resin, the micro, do all the glassing work, and the screw doesn't get in the way, and you can remove the screw after it cures. Do that on all four of these points, and get all your screws in position first. I'm going to do the same thing on this inboard block. I'll show it to you one more time. Pardon the jiggle and the wiggle. There's our nifty snap-on ratchet screwdriver. Right at about the middle of the block, make sure it fits where you want it to be. Push right through that foam. Tighten. And you can feel up here with your thumbnail, you can feel it squeezing. I should be able to find all those holes without any sweat next time. I'm going to go mix up one shot of resin. I'll turn that into dry micro after I've brushed on the resin onto the foam surfaces where all the contact's being made. I'm going to smear on the dry micro, and we'll show that process coming up next. We're back. I think you can see the hole here in the block of foam. I've mixed up 105, 206. It's late. I don't need to hurry this along tonight. So I brush on the resin. Stuff is damn near clear. And brush it on all the surfaces that are going to be pulled up against this rib. There's only two, the bottom. And, oops, sorry about that. Bottom surface here, this edge here. And I'm going to paint all the blocks, and then I'm going to mix some of my 206, 105 mix to dry micro and stick it in place. I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, we've brushed resin on the surfaces. We're out about an inch. We're up to well forward of the block. Like so. Make sure that it fits. I got my screwdriver ready. Now I'm going to cover the bottom of the block with my medium dry mix of micro. I don't want any gaps. And I'm going to cover this surface as well, high in the center and thinner on the edges. Why, you say? Oh, very simply. The material in the middle pushes out in all directions, displacing air. Now, I don't want any epoxy on my hands because I don't want to damage my screwdriver. Click. We'll set up. It goes right into the block of foam where we had preset it before. We tighten. Some squeeze can be seen, I'm sure. I'll come back in a few minutes and replace what I'm removing right now with a much drier mix of micro. And I'll get all this stuff off of here. Now I'm going to do it on all the other pieces. And then I'm going to be back to slurry this foam, which I could do right now with what I've got. This is dry enough where I could cover the foam with it like so. I should say it's wet enough where I could slurry the foam surfaces, like so. And the front edge as well. Now I've got some excess to remove from here in a few minutes, but this is west and this isn't the fast. So it's not going to go off nearly as quickly as the 205. But I'm going to do this to each block. Back with you in a moment. Now I've grabbed some scrap cloth. I'm looking at this. This is about 2.5 inches long. I'll make it 3.5 inches long or so. Make sure that it's high enough so that when I lay it in there, it will lap where I want it to go. Plus or minus 45. You can see the rows. The vertical or horizontal makes it 40 and 45. I'm going to lap onto this rib about 1/2 inch or so and onto the floor. Because it's bid, it should conform to all those surfaces. So I mock that up. It'll be about as long as it is high. I've got some micro in the corners making my transitions. I brush a little resin on the bottom. Up in the front here, just ahead of it, and on the rib. Now, for the sake of conversation here, this was the first 2 shots that I mixed, both for the micro and for wetting surfaces. I've been going fast enough that the resin is still uncured. Yeah, it is a cool day. Okay, going into that corner. I'm going to pull this bottom corner forward. The grain orientation is going to change so that you have plus or minus 90 in this corner because this is about a 45. Well, to do that you have to have a radius of micro in that corner or it will not conform to the edge. I've got about 3/8 of an inch of width here. It gets much wider, it goes up the edge. Rub it out, rub it in. Because of the complex curves, make certain that you've got ample amount of micro in this corner so it can conform. I started laying up these ribs a few hours ago, the earlier ribs, and my surfaces are all still chemically active, so I avoid sanding steps. It's been a long day for me, but it saves me trouble and gives me an opportunity to show you something that you can do as an alternative to all that sanding that we all complain about. Don't think I don't. And now we have a firm attachment of that block to the rib. This skin to the interior surface is distributing the loads to a much larger surface area. We'll be back with you in a little bit. Good morning, we're back again. And they've cured. We'll give you a close-up shot here of outboard end, what that looks like. You have to excuse me, I'm playing cameraman this morning. And things having a hard time focusing. There we go. There's one all cleaned up, trimmed off at the top. Let me give you a perspective here. There we go. And the inboard ones we haven't done yet. Very important tool here. That one we've partially trimmed off. And this is the one we're going to give you as a sampling of how and what to do this morning. So ignore the noise of the mill. I'll be back with you in just a moment as I set up to cut this. We're going to cut it oversize. You can lay this right on top of the trailing edge for cutting off the majority of the part. Now that we've removed most of the material, and I mentioned before that if you've removed too much, an eighth of an inch, quarter inch between here and the underside is of no consequence whatsoever, because you're going to fill that with micro, and it's a lot stronger than the foam. And so now we're going to trim all these down until your upper deck fits on here without hitting anything, and we'll be back with you for the next segment. What we have here on tape is a minor error that we can easily handle in the manner that I use to place these two blocks of foam. What I discovered this morning is that I really should have come as close to the edge of the CLI as possible on the backside. If I go to 9.75 inches from the center line and place the inboard edge of this rib, both this rib and this rib, on this line right here, it means that the inboard edge of this rib is a half inch from the center line of our hard point foam. That's giving me a better load distribution into the backside of the shear web and thus into the spar. And I have enough room here that I'm still a quarter of an inch outboard of the CLI on this side and of the lift tab. Actually better on the lift tab. I'll have room for glass on this side. Extremely redundant. It's not really all that imperative that that be the case. But since I'm basically lazy, by placing this here, it gives me one more bond face going all the way to the edge, and it means I have less glass work to do on this side. It's already done on this. So I recommend to you that you place the inboard edge of this rib at 9.75 from the center line on both left and right, leading edge pieces and trailing edge pieces. It doesn't affect BL 34.5 or 54.3. They don't change in any way. So don't concern yourself with those. And we'll try and insert this section of the tape earlier on, but I do hope you're watching the whole tape before you do anything with this process. Well, we're back with you guys. We're covering the continuing saga of what to do when you make a mistake, like in my case. You can see the cross-hatched area just to the left of the lift tab on top of the shear web. And these two holes, which you cannot see, I'll show you where they are. One of them is here, one of them is here. They were drilled through earlier on the scribe lines that represent the centers of the NC2As. I believe those numbers are right, I'm not sure, but as I said before, if I had my druthers, I'd have moved the rib to here. That way, two of these puppies could bond in, one centered over each, leaving about, quarter to 3/8 gap between them, which you would fill either with another slice of one of these pieces, bonded together with micro, and then the rib would be directly up against it. So to modify that condition, I'm just going to make 3 of them. I'll bond them together with West, center them over the holes, and I've sanded the entire area here all the way up to and onto that glass tab behind the CLIs, or at least a good half to 3/4 of an inch onto this area underneath. And the one on the right here that goes, I'll center that up. We have another one that centers in this position. And I've radiused these edges already. This doesn't see the load that the others see, where the control horns go. So I'll center this up on the hole. I've sanded the area well on both sides, well forward as well up onto that shear web area. And I'll put 2 plies of glass lapping from this side, a radius around the bottom of micro or flocks, and lapping onto the surface of at least a 1/2 inch and all the way around the front face and forward a 1/2 inch onto the glass surfaces to distribute the load of this isolated member. And again, as I mentioned before, if I had my druthers, this rib would be up against this and that wouldn't be necessary but on one side. I'll get back to you after I bond these 3 puppies together with West 10525. There's a drywall screw from here, a drywall screw from here. I'll cover this surface with micro, squish, and allow to partially cure, and then I'll lay up the 2 plies of bit. Not, of course, these in this position, but where they're supposed to go. Back with you in a moment. Okay, back again for a moment of exposure here. Notice the screw, notice the radiuses here and here. All the sanding is already done. Placement's ready to go. The screw must face the inboard surface, or you will never hear a thing while a G3 is landing. You'll never get that screw out if it's on this side. Do remember that. Okay, so I'm going to brush on the resin and bond this in place. Now, what I don't want to have happen is I don't want a lot of extra resin floating around the perimeter. I can, after an hour of cure, while any resin that is still uncured, tacky but cured enough for this not to move, I can lay glass up from this side and all the way over to, let's say just beyond the middle of both of my plies. One long, one short. Let it semi-cure a little bit longer, and then remove the screw from this side and lay up 2 plies of glass from here lapping onto the front face. But that way I take advantage of the semi-cured state. I don't have to wait for it to cure, sand it off. I can do it all while it's partially cured. But the critical detail is that screw. It's got to come out of there before I can lay a glass on this side. So we'll step through that process, and I'll show you how and why I do these things as I go. You probably don't need this section, but I've already brushed resin on the area. Right in here, up to here, right down to the glass at the back of the shear web. Same thing on the opposing side. Now I'll take this, brush resin in there, put a little micro between the surfaces, tighten them up, and we're back with you in a moment. Okay, we're back. Big old pile of micro, relatively dry. Everything's been brushed with resin and smeared. And centered. There we go. Get it right, babe. We're going to squish this thing on here. And we're trying to get the stuff to squeeze out at the bottom front, bottom aft, left and right. We don't want any air underneath it. I use this edge here to index where I'm going to be. Okay, that's close enough. Now I'm going to remove the excess. This is 105, 205, the fast West resin. Some of you might even be able to see the pinkish hue. That means that it is approximating a year in age. It's okay. It will go absolutely red raspberry in a year and a couple of months. And it's good. It's still usable in secondary applications, but I wouldn't use it for primary bonding applications. It's good in tooling at that point. We'll clean it up, and we'll be back in a minute. It occurred to me a moment ago that we can make this a little easier on ourselves, so I'm going to go just ahead of where the screw is here, drill a number 40 hole down to the middle block and into the skins. I'm going to take a very long drywall screw, like the one I'm using presently to hold these together. And I'm going to run it straight down and squeeze this in place so that I can handle it while this thing is entirely in its wet condition. Back with you in a moment. Okay, back, and you can clearly see the screw in the foreground on the opposite side. I did the same. This affords me the opportunity of wetting those surfaces and applying glass to both sides of the smaller one and one side of the larger one. Back to you then. Okay, we're back. Now I want to show you just a little bit of it from a three-dimensional point of view here. Right side, the area that I was referring to before up in the front, with that radius of micro around the perimeter, the screw in the center, the screw on the inboard surface. You swing to the other member. A little more micro on this one, a larger radius. Not that it's necessary, but you can see the wet resin around the perimeter. I have yet to slurry all around the perimeter, but I'm going to let it tighten up just a little bit before I do that. Tighten as in partially cure. Once it reaches enough of a cure, I'll remove the screw from both of the pieces. Back to you for the next step in a moment. Okay, we're back. I've removed the screw from the horizontal. This screw here is now missing. I've covered it with a slurry of 105-206. I'm in no hurry at this particular point, but my resin is already getting warm because I decided to use the same material for laying up as I did for my slurry. And that's elapsed time. Okay, so I've got resin around the perimeter of both. I'm wetting the opposing side right now. I don't have a cameraman, so you can't see me, but it's no different than what I just did on that side. Now I measure this distance, here, 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 and here, and that's how much cloth I cut. So we've got essentially 2, that's times plus 2 is 4, plus 3 is 7. We add another inch per side, that's 9 inches. And it's going to have to be at least 3 inches wide. So 3 by 9 gives me the piece that I need. I'll cut that, and I'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, we've got the 3 by 9 cut. Pardon my boarding house reach. I'm going to drop down in front here, about halfway down, and make sure that the portion at the bottom, which you cannot see, my apologies, is going to lap forward about 3/4 of an inch. You got to get underneath here, lap it in the front. It's my first step. I'll show you the results of all this monkey motion here in a moment. I have enough going around the base and up the wall. I'm going to do this 2 times. Let's see. Stretch it back up. Release the height of the spar. Loads of fun, this process. I'm sure you agree. Okay, we're going to wet that out. Back with you in a moment. We're back on for a moment. I'm going to show you one little process here. Wrapping of the glass. Now, you notice the glass here. I'm going to cut the corners off of it. There's a lot of excess material. The corners are gone. I take it down, I flip this side forward at the bottom. Make sure it laps forward well onto the shear web down on the other side. I come around the corners. I lap on the edges here, like so. I wet it out. I hope someone's upstairs answering the phone. And that's essentially it. We'll get it all wetted out. Yep. Okay, well, I'm going to wet this out and I'll be back to you in a moment. Final shot after glassing. A little messy in these corners, but after it gets semi-hard, I'll run this razor blade through here and trim that off. This side's a little better, but that'll get trimmed off here. All the stuff above obviously gets trimmed off. Other side is similar. You can see the gleam glass there. It's too difficult messing with this stuff out here, so I left it a little long. It's about 3/4 of an inch in length across here. This will all get trimmed off. The screw will come out. We'll sand it to shape. I'll give you one more close-up here. And you can see where the glass laps forward here, about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch onto that support area. Oops, no, can't focus that close. All right. No bubbles. And nicely wetted. It's hard to control the amount of resin on a surface this small. And back to you for trim later. Well, back again. I was not patient enough to wait for this stuff to harden. It's still, as you can see, soft. And so it's below the surface, not by much. You can tell by the way this comes across here. I took the Canard upper skin, put it on, matched up the center line, squeezed and made certain that the trailing edge closes. It still does. And then I thought, well, let's find out what it feels like. So I'm going to hold it up here and make certain that I can see myself on the camera. Take this thing back, my ugly mug, and I'll see if you can see me holding up the Canard with one hand, out. I'm not that strong, and it's like a big model airplane at this stage. Now we'll stick the upper skin on it. Now, I would say that most of you have not had the opportunity to pick up a Canard in this condition and feel what it weighs. And it's not that heavy. It's lighter than a standard Canard. The first ones that we built were not. We had too much structure and they were far too stiff. We ended up having to go with complete carbon laminates because of the requirements of bagging. And so resultantly we ended up with stiffer and much lighter structures. We'll back it in a little bit and we'll show the assembly process for these two. Feed and recording. Okay, now I'm going to start prepping for bonding the lid on. I have 40 grit sand off all the gloss. You're going to sand the leading edge completely. You're going to sand the trailing edge completely. You're going to sand down to where the foam transition is in this area. And we have some preliminary bonding to do in this area. We're going to put duct tape on this area, bring it up, and fill this area full of micro. And we might even do so with the upper wing skin on and cast this area here with solid micro so that our bond in the backside is a number of different types of adhesives. We can use Westflox, we can use CPD, we can use Jeffco. There's any number of resins that we can use, but we're going to be bonding here, here, and here, and I'll hold your hand through all the steps here. But first thing I'm going to do is sand everything in preparation for the bonding. I have to sand the opposing surfaces on the wing skin, upper, ensuring that I will get a bond between the two surfaces. I'll be back to you for the next step, but sand all that stuff before we go any further. Good morning. Here we are. We're going to look at preparations for doing final bonding. The leading edges have been sanded. Shear web has been sanded its entire length, all the way down. And I'm about to do a prep to the ribs, also in preparation for sanding. Been much debate, calculations, and thought about whether or not we're going to T-tape the ribs. And here's what we're going to do to the rib. And it's because there's such a small field of influence. The T-tape here, 2 inches in length. The rib is largely working in compression. Clean up the edges here inside the glass. Some of you may be familiar with the old Long Easy. When Burt had you put the top of the strake on, this was not done. You just stacked flocks up on the top of the surfaces, and you expected that the flocks oozing out over the edge, bonding on the side, would give him the strength necessary. We would like a little more attachment than that. That's 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch down inside the surface. We're going to do that on all the ribs, fore and aft. But we're dependent upon the preponderance of surface area, both on the shear web cap, this forward section, this is the inherent stiffness of a D section, the load distribution qualities of this surface area, which is 2.5 inches long and 3.5, fore and aft, and 3.5 inches wide. The amount of surface area here, the trailing edge bond, the small area expressed aft of the shear web, the fact that the center portion is stiffened by the sprocket cap. There is no need for T-tapes on the ribs. It's just there's enough bonding surface area where it's not really required. So we're going to prepare all these surfaces for bonding, and we'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, for those of you who are watching, this is the method. for determining the depth of this influence. Long drill bit. As long as the drill bit's all the way down below the surface, I know I've got 3/16 of an inch of depression. It's going to be done on the forward rib as well. It's going to be done from the back. Everything ready to, this is another one of the steps. We're getting closer and closer to actually closure. But what we want to do is make certain that you vent between each of these bays and also create ports that condensation that might collect can run back and drain out. It's a flat structure, so it's conceivable that the water would sit in the bottom unless you actively attempted to drain water to a low point. So we'll start off by going into the corner at the forward edge of the shear web and go through the exterior skin, laying right on the bottom. And for the exterior skin, now you can see it. You'll see it come through in this corner. Can you see it, Misha?
Right there.
And I endeavor to go right down against the surfaces so that if I do get water, it's going to run down to the front. And if I pick the whole thing up, it'll run to the center where it can drip past the lift tabs where I left gaps around the lift tabs. Now I'm going to do that. Now I can't come in as straight as I can here, so I go into the corner. I go through the exterior skin. If I try and go through, I'll go through the carbon. I don't want to do that. So I'll go through here. So I got a hole from the I can see it on the other side. There we go. Okay. Same thing here. Now, just because I'm paranoid, let's say the particulates remain in there, I'm going to drill a hole midfield for breathing. One's for draining, one's for breathing. Excuse me.
Go on.
And do that here. And here. So each one of these bulkheads, I'm going to drill 2 holes. One right in the middle of the rib, and then one in an area that allows that fluid to transfer. And I'm going to drill through these bays, fore and aft, so I can breathe between bays. Let's see here. Right against. Oh, it's my mute. Okay. And mid-span. Do that on all ribs. And don't miss any of these things, because as you go up in altitude, it's quite possible to blow the skin off somewhere while the pressure's trying to equalize. We'll see you in a bit. Back again, we're going to show you a few more little things here. You may notice that there are noticeably visible, gaps around the opening. The lift tabs come through. You can see all the way around it, left and right. all the way around the perimeter. I have a hole drilled here in the center, and back at the back end of the spar, there are holes visible there and there, just at the back end of the spar caps to make certain water can drain. Now, at some point, when I don't mind cutting into a structure, I'll cut a much larger hole here inside it'll be inside the fuselage, maybe 3/4 of an inch in diameter after the spar cap for water to drain out. Now in the front, I'm not worried about that. I have plenty of surface area, plenty of drain areas on both of those lift tabs, so I'm not concerned about it. Just think about it a lot before you're sure you're going to close. Make sure that all of the bays are vented. All right, we're back for a little short piece. We're getting ready to do some work on the trailing edge, so we've taken the tape. It was stuck down here along the center, and I was lucky that its integrity held up. I pulled off the aft piece, moved it to the back edge, moved the forward piece and pulled it and lapped it about 1/8 of an inch along here. Exactitude here is not real important, because what we're going to do here shortly is that we're going to this aft edge back in here. Can you see that, Robert? From the tangent point here all the way to here. I'm going to fill the area from this tangential area up to just where it starts to go flat on the trailing edge. I'm going to fill that with dry micro. I'm going to brush West 105, 205, it's full length. Make up some very dry micro, 105, 205. Pack it on here, and then squish this down on top of it and get this area filled. I'll be back to you in a few moments for the next step. We're on to another step. Surprise, surprise. Okay. You might notice, I hope you notice, that there is duct tape now on the trailing edge here, about 3/4 of an inch wide. This is an area I don't want the micro to bond to. Remember we did this duct tape here on the back side? We don't want a bonding here, we don't want a bonding here. What we do want a bonding is from about here to here. We're going to brush this with 105, 205 resin, then we're going to make up very dry 105, 205 micro, apply quickly, and then squish. And we'll let cure, and then pop it off, clean up any material that happens to squeeze forward. Because we only want to create this triangle here, up and over, filling up this area, so that when we put flocks in here that doesn't ooze over into this. We want to stiffen this section. We'll be back to you as we brush on a little resin and start applying micro. Okay, we're brushing on the resin. One shot was enough for Misha's, as well as for Michael Schuette's. We're covering everything. You just need to make enough micro to stick. And the micro is going to be dry enough so it does not run, does not move when we squish this thing down. So do like so. And we'll be back with you as we put on the micro. Okay, recording again. I'm going to make sure you can see me as I hand mix this stuff. It's dry, really dry. I have to hand knead it so that it's cohesive enough to keep from falling apart. Not so dry as to be like pie crust dough, but dry enough that it holds its shape. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to roll it into, excuse the expression, ladies and gentlemen, dog turd kinds of formations. And I'm hoping that my mic, I can see what I'm doing here. Just pressed on here so that it conforms. The stuff is already warm in my hand, so I'm not going to have a whole lot of time. I'm going to make sure it covers all of the possibilities. We mixed up 2 shots, which should be sufficient to cover all of our needs in this regard. I'm sure I'm excessive, so I'm going to remove some of this material and use it elsewhere. We'll be back to you in a bit when we get ready to put the top on. Ready? Go. Okay. We haven't told you this yet, but the truth of the matter is this is the first time we've ever done this operation on one of these. So I'm running on feel and past experience. And favor the vertical, push it this direction so that when it squishes, that the excessive material helps provide pressure that distributes it well. We don't care if it pushes aft here. It's going to do that, but we want, before it pushes aft, we want to make certain that it does the filling job that we really want it to, which is the aft triangle area. I'm going to press it at the bottom here, make sure it conforms. The speed of the cure has already been reduced by getting it out of the container. The temperature right now outside is about 72 degrees, which is just perfect for what we're doing. Okay, it's been 2.5, 3 hours or so, and we're going to pull the clecos. And unceremoniously pull. Let's see what we got. See if we got the results that we wanted. And you can see we have a print here from there to here. And from here aft, I'm on top of the tape. Well, this is the area I wanted to isolate back here. Now what we'll probably do is take a chisel and remove what we don't really need along here. I can also use a file to remove stuff here. Now let's expose an area here right along the duct tape area, and we'll show you what we were trying to accomplish. There's our tape edge right there. Go just a little further forward and see if I can expose it. Not yet, but remember what I was talking about was trying to isolate the influence, the area that I want to influence with flux. I don't want that flux flowing out here. I don't want to leave this area unsupported. If you can see the gloss here in the little bump, this is from here forward is completely unsupported, and there's no foam in this area. The foam is starts here. And this little portion right here would end up relatively flexible. I didn't want that, so putting the micro in there beefs this up and now provides a dammed off area between here and the trailing edge where only flux or whatever adhesive you choose to use is isolated. And it looks as though we have handily accomplished just exactly that. It's nice when a plan comes together. So after you've removed it, there we go. That's what we're shooting for right there. You can clean this up to look as nice as you like. Remove as much of it as you can. You come off this edge parallel to this surface, and you will be accomplishing what we were shooting for here. So proceed in this fashion, and try not to capture duct tape in here. This is still, the prepping on this is still good, it's still sanded, with a good bond. We'll get back to you after the cleanup. Thank you. We're back. Now we've done all of our sanding prep on the trailing edge. We've removed all the excess material. The area inside the ribs is sanded and prepped on all surfaces. Now here is your option. You could, at this stage, having sanded the surfaces you know you're going to bond to on the underside of the upper deck, or you can cover it with silver tape. Why would you cover it with silver tape, you ask? Is because we're going to pre-fill all of these. We're going to brush CPD, Jeffco, safety epoxy, whatever it is you're intending to use, into these surfaces, cover them with resin, and then fill them up with whatever fillers we're going to use. Flox here, micro here, Flocro in the ribs, Flocro here, nothing on top of the spot cap, because we already know that matches the underside skin precisely. Flox here, and then we're going to squish this thing down, re-clico it, weight it, and let it cure entirely. And tomorrow morning, we're going to pop it free, and we're going to remove all the material that oozes beyond the surfaces that we really want to do the bonding. If I did that right now, if I brushed this with resin and applied all my materials onto the surfaces and bonded it down, I would be done with this and I would be complete with my closure. But I wouldn't know how much extra material I had on the interior. This is already obvious. Yeah. You may have noticed too that I've already cleaned all this stuff up. This is approximately 3/4 of an inch to 5/8 of an inch wide. This area is the carbon-to-carbon area. That's why this is flox. This acts as a dam forward to the surface. I don't think that Richard's got the phones. We'll be back to you in a moment. Okay, so sorry about the phone call, but you have the option. You can do all this fill right now. The other plus is that this is still quite active chemically, and when I do this fill one way or the other, I'm going to get a chemical bond to these surfaces. I'm not going to put anything on top of this when I do this process. I'm just going to fill up adjacent to it. Some of it will end up spreading onto here, but without consequence. So again, brush resin, brush resin, brush resin, and essentially we're dealing with ribs in this aft section only, and nothing to do with the shear over the leading edge. And you can see that this is pretty much a straight line coming up here, and right off this surface, acting as a dam. We'll come back in a few minutes and show you the process. Do not use a fast resin for this process unless you're just doing a few small spots. If you're doing this whole thing that we're talking about, use a slower resin. Thank you. We'll be back to you for your next process in a moment. Down here. Down here. Okay. CPD in this case, you can use whatever suits you. We're going to wet this whole trailing edge. It's going to get flocks. I'm going to wet this completely with CPD. The inside of my ribs. These ribs have not only been cleaned out to 3/16, but the walls here and here have been scraped with a chisel to remove the loose material. I'm going to go up here in the front. Same thing. Make sure you get the glass edges. We're going to mix up a loose batch of flocks, and then we're going to stiffen it up with micro. We'll call that flockrow. And it's much lighter than flocks, but it's also a lot stronger than regular micro because we've like adding straw to clay for making bricks. We give it some fibrous, some resistance to cracking and breaking. It's also better in compression. So we're going to get all these ribs done. Treat the whole trailing edge this way, all these hard surfaces this way. Well, remember too that we're taking advantage of the fact that this is still chemically green. The last few processes you've seen, we've been linking curing processes. It doesn't hurt to let some of this CPD lap up on top of this micro a little bit. We've also put this layer of tape down so when the resin goes underneath this corner, it doesn't bond top of your jig. Misha's got clear plastic here, backing tape, on top of his wood, to which he would most surely bond well. Wet it out well. We're going to be brushing Misha's too. We're both doing these things at the same time. We'll be back with you for the next step, which is the application of flockrow, flockrow and flocks. Okay, we're back. This is the area where we get flocks, and of course you want it to be higher than you need it. So you're going to put it up slightly above the height of this point where it transitions from here to here. You have to build up a peak. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill up against the, can you see this, Misha? I'm going to fill up against the back side of my micro here. Get good contact. And after I get that, then I'm going to build up volume. You have to overfill, which is the whole reason behind this intermediate process that I have on many other occasions not done. I know I've left material behind, and I can tell that there's a substantial increase in weight in the bonding processes, because this is your last chance at making certain that you have full structural integrity. If you don't overbond, there's no way to know if you filled up all the gaps between the bonding mating surfaces. I suspect that is probably the only thing that ever has bothered me about the molded process is that up until this point you know that everything is straighter, lighter, stronger, spark caps, skins, cores, everything is stronger. You get to this stage and you wonder, how do I know that I've got good contact? Well, with this intermediate step, we get a very, very good idea of any areas that we've missed. We remove excess material that's goobed out, and then when we put our final bonding material on, we'll need much less of it to be absolutely certain we have a good attachment. We'll be back with you for the next step when we start filling our ribs. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Flocro, this is 2 shots of resin. And that is the consistency of the flocks before I add the micro balloons. When I add the micro and stiffen it up, it will have the fibrous nature of flocks, but the dry handling qualities of micro. It'll be much lighter than it would be if it was obviously just flocks, and a lot stronger than if it was just micro. I'll be back to you in a minute with the final mixture. Those of you who haven't seen it before, this is Flocco. It's very light, but it's kind of cottage cheesy looking, and it's stiff enough to hold its shape. We don't have much tape left on this tape, so we got to make sure we get this on tape. I've already packed this stuff up here on top. It's got to go up high enough to make certain that it makes contact with the underside, so we have to build it up high. The first thing you do with it, give me a zoom here, Misha, is we push it into the bottoms of the grooves in the ribs. Get it into the bottoms. Make sure you get full contact before you stack the stuff up. And I have none in here. Push it to the bottom. And then go ahead and do a stack up to make sure it gets full contact with the underside of that duct tape. All right, do this on all the ribs. Pack all this stuff up. Make sure that you're reasonably certain that when you put that lid on, you're going to get contact. Okay, back to you soon. Okay, shoot. Okay, we got the lid ready to go. It's all silver taped. Everything's piled high enough to make certain that I make contact on everything. I've removed my gloves so I don't get stuff all over that were on my gloves onto my surfaces. And I'm going to take my leading edge, center line. So I have no bonding material on the leading edges because I don't have any tape on the leading edges. You can tape yours if you want. I'm going to go to center line. I don't know if you guys saw that or not, but okay. Get the stuff off my hands. Let's go back. This is not a permanent bond. What's going to be sticking to the lower section, of course, is, but now I'm on my center line. Now I'm going to Clico and squish. And then I'm going to weight it. I'll be back with you in just a moment. Shoot. Okay, we're down to our last few feet of tape, and I want to show you pulling off this section. The front end's this is like taffy. You can't do it slow. There's your cast trailing edge. There's no air, no gaps down the entire length, and we've kept things down to a minimum of weight because nothing has gone forward of the micro dam. And you can see we have lots of excess here sticking out. And you just go pop it off, knock off the extra, trim it with a chisel, and then we're going to prep to do our final bond. Back with you in a bit. It's flashing. Okay, we're going. We're using a special kind of epoxy here for this, but first thing I'd like to note is that Every area that interfaces something is going to bond to has already been well and completely sanded. Leading edge, tops of the shear web, back end is still active. Our first tapes this morning were removing this thing. This is still chemically active. Now we get this to, we have our application device. Oops, squirt. And no clear stuff yet, so there we go. Now we put the tip on. And what we're going to do is try not to run out of tape before we show you this, because I don't know if I have any more tapes this evening, and I'm going to bond this on tonight. I'm going to put a perimeter. Now watch it mix. It goes from yellow and blue. It comes out green. And the tip's large enough, and I'm going to define the perimeter of this opening. I'm going to do this on all these parts. I'm going to put it a little bit here, this, so that I know exactly where everything is. This will transfer to the other side, and then I'll pull it off, I'll smear it around, and then I'll put on enough to actually fill all the gaps. We'll be back with you in a minute. All right, we don't have much time here. You notice that define the perimeter of all things here aft, between these two, right along this edge, each rib. I'm going to put the top on, print that, smear that around, and then put on the final bead for final application. We'll be back with you in a moment. Okay, we're back. Hope we got it. This is it. Let's take a look at the print. Now you can see where I have to smear material. We'll be back with you in a minute after we smear this around. Shooting? Okay, notice this down here. We have everything smeared. We're going to do our epoxy on. Everything here is smeared. We have thin coat on everything. Now we're going to put on a big thick coat and squeeze the top down. And that coat will look something like this, and I hope we can get this tape done before the video runs out. Okay, stop here. We'll get back to you in a moment after we do a squeeze test. Okay, here we go. You can see how much material squeezed out. Now when we do these other pieces out here, make sure we have a lot